do it in 15. Oh my God. This being Chandrika's instruction. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, the subject that I have chosen to speak on is inclusive growth through inclusive governance, and I'm going to restrict myself to the Indian example. After listening to President Chandrika Kumaratunga's outstanding inaugural address, I fear much of what I have to say is simply to echo her golden words. I would like to begin by acknowledging my debt to the direction that she has given to our deliberations. So it's curious but true that since the time of Mahatma Gandhi, there has been extensive recognition in India of the imperative of effective Panchayat Raj, that is, effective local self-government, but actual progress in securing this goal has been fitful, uncertain, and not sustained. In consequence, where Secretary General Westendrop, in his inaugural address, in his opening remarks, called for, quote, a democracy that delivers, our democracy, I'm afraid, has not proved to be a democracy that delivers, principally because we have not succeeded in making our development processes inclusive. That is, ensuring that the people at large, and especially the poor, are tangibly benefited by the growth process. This is partly because of insufficient conceptual clarity and conviction regarding the indispensability of Panchayat Raj, that is, inclusive governance to inclusive development, and partly because, as flagged by Professor Pratap Bhanu Mehta, the absence of the required political will to overcome resistance to the systemic revolution entailed in effective Panchayat Raj on the part of vested interests in the polity and the bureaucracy who stand to lose powers of patronage and influence if there is indeed a genuine overhaul of the development process in the direction of power to the people and maximum democracy and maximum devolution. These two, power to the people and maximum democracy and maximum devolution, were the twin slogans coined by Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi in presenting to Parliament on 15 May 1989 his initial draft constitutional amendment for according constitutional sanction, sanctity, and safeguards to the third tier of governance. The amendment aimed at involving people in their respective neighborhoods, their neighborhood communities, in running their own affairs through local institutions of self-government, comprising their own elected representatives, responsible to their own community electorate, and therefore likely to be more responsive than a distant bureaucracy to the felt and articulated needs and demands of their neighborhood communities. The challenge being to convert accelerated growth into inclusive growth, the path favored by government after government in India has been to exponentially increase spending on social sector and anti-poverty programs in the expectation that a critical mass of expenditure will somehow be reached for the money thrown at the poor to become the straw that they can clutch at to rise out of their misery. However, the accumulated Indian experience over the last 20 years would appear to indicate that while financial resources constitute an essential component of poverty alleviation, financial resources alone, without effective community participation, result in outcomes being nowhere near commensurate with outlays. paripasu, more effective Panchayat Raj should result in outcomes being brought more in line with outlays. Consider, sir, if you will, India's record on central budgetary outlays on social sector spending and programs targeted at a direct assault on extreme poverty, such as the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Program. This has been most impressive, rising from rupees 7,500 crore in 1994-95, that is approximately 1.5 billion US dollars, to over 185,000 crore provided for in fiscal 2011-12, that is about 37 billion US dollars, and nearly 200,000 crore rupees, that is about $40 billion, proposed for the coming financial year. This amounts to an augmentation of central government outlays of some 25 times over the last 18 years. Perhaps that's the highest in the world. This is in addition to an outlay of nearly the same amount, that is $40 billion, on subsidies primarily intended to cushion the poor against rising prices of food, fuel, and critical agricultural inputs like fertilizer. This makes India among the fastest growing spenders on programs designed to target multidimensional poverty. Yet, the UN Human Development Index, first published in 1994, which is why I gave you the 1994 spending figure, placed India then at position 134 in the league ranking. And the latest 2011 UN Human Development Index places India now, after spending $40 billion a year on social sector and anti-poverty programs, at exactly the same position, 134. We appear to be on a treadmill of social development, running very fast to stay at exactly the same place. Some people call it the Manmohan model of development. I call it the Alice in Wonderland model of development. For the World Food Program tells us that half the world's hungry live in India. And the International Food Policy Research Institute's most recent report classifies India's food security index as, quote, alarming, unquote. We can take some comfort from the fact that we used to be extremely alarming, we're now merely alarming. Notwithstanding India's extraordinarily high growth rate in GDP terms, India remains a low-income, food deficit country in which as many as 35% of the population consumes less than 80% of its minimum human energy requirements. Where 9 out of 10 pregnant women suffer from malnutrition and anemia, and in consequence, 47% of children under the age of 5 are moderately to severely undernourished. FAO tells us that in the 5 years leading to the turn of the century, India added more newly hungry millions than the rest of the world put together. ActionAid has just confirmed this for the more recent years. So perhaps it's not without significance that the Planning Commission and all its supporters have disappeared from this room before I got the opportunity to speak. The question I pose is, I saw Shankar Acharya here a little while ago, and I was glad that the enemy was going to be present, but he too has disappeared. So I'm hoping that Chandrika will put this on some website or something which people in the Planning Commission understand better than I do, and we can try and bring it to their attention. I have been trying to bring it to their attention for the better part of 1 decade, which is why perhaps Montek Singh Ahluwalia has the same initials as I do, MSA. It stands for the most seriously affected economies. Now, the question I wish to pose to my absent loved ones and to those who are here is, why is there such a mismatch between growth in the booming service and manufacture sectors of the Indian economy and consequently in the income of the entrepreneurial and highly skilled classes, in contrast to the halting, uncertain, and unsustained amelioration in the condition of the vast majority of Indians? Why has the share of agriculture in GDP shrunk from about 1/3 at the time reforms were initiated to a mere 12% now, whereas the share of the population in agriculture has remained virtually the same over these 2 decades, hovering around 60%. 60% of our population is dependent now on 12% of our GDP. Why are higher outlays impacting so relatively little on all that makes life more bearable for the poor? Why, in a word, is India prospering, but Indians are not? And why is political attention to the issues of poverty so muted in comparison to the hurrahs we hear over GDP growth rates? For alas, the poverty of our politics is reflected in the politics of our poverty. In the absence of inclusive governance, the people at the grassroots, that is, the intended beneficiaries of poverty alleviation programs, are left abjectly dependent on a bureaucratic delivery mechanism over which they have no effective control. The alternative system would be participatory development, or Panchayat Raj, where the people themselves are enabled to build their own future through elected representatives responsible to the local community and therefore responsive to their needs. Not only is a responsive bureaucratic administration almost a contradiction in terms, the Indian experience of the last 6 decades would appear to confirm that bureaucratic delivery mechanisms absorb a disproportionately high share of the earmarked expenditure. It is widely agreed that 75 to 85% of expenditure on poverty alleviation schemes is absorbed by the administrative costs of the delivery mechanism itself. No wonder outcomes are so derisory. It was Rajiv Gandhi, based on a report prepared by Ajit Bhattacharya, who's here with us, about one scheme in one state of India, who estimated